Part 7. The Rusty Boat and the Black Sea Gamble, 1919.
All right, man, so it's May 1919. Imagine Istanbul. It's like a pressure cooker about to blow. The British are everywhere. The Sultan is basically hiding under his bed, and the city is crawling with spies. Mustafa Kemal is sitting in his house in Ankara, smoking one cigarette after another, looking at the maps of Anatolia. He knows he has to get out. If he stays in Istanbul, he's just another out-of-work general waiting for a jail cell. But he can't just walk out the front door. He needs a reason. He needs a mission. And here's the crazy part, man. The British actually gave him the keys to the front door. See, there was some trouble up in the Black Sea region. The Turkish locals were starting to fight back against some Greek gangs, and the British were worried. They told the Sultan, "Look, send one of your guys up there to tell the Turks to hand over their guns and behave, or we're going to come in and do it ourselves." The Sultan looks around and sees Mustafa Kemal. He thinks, perfect, this guy is too loud, he's too smart, and he's dangerous. Let's send him to the Black Sea. He'll be far away. He'll have to do what the British say, and he'll be out of my hair. It was the biggest mistake in the history of mistakes. They literally gave the most dangerous man in the empire the title of Inspector General and the power to command almost everyone in Anatolia. They thought they were sending a sheep to quiet the wolves. They were actually sending a wolf to lead the pack. So, May 16th, 1919, a Friday, Mustafa Kemal goes to the palace to see the Sultan one last time. It's a weird, tense meeting. Vaden is sitting there, looking out at the British ships in the Bosphorus, and he tells Mustafa Kemal, "Pasha, you've saved the state before. You can save it again." He wasn't talking about independence, though. He was talking about keeping the peace so the British wouldn't get mad. Mustafa Kemal just nods, kisses the Sultan's hand, playing the part of the loyal soldier, and walks out. He knew it was the last time he'd ever see that palace as a servant of the Ottoman house. He goes down to the Galata Pier. Waiting for him is the Bandirma. Man, you gotta understand, this wasn't some high-tech naval ship. The Bandirma was a rusty, creaky, beat-up old steamer that looked like it was held together by prayer and luck. It didn't even have a working compass. For God's sake, he boards a ship with 18 of his closest officers, guys who were ready to die for him. Just as they're pulling away, a British patrol boat stops them. The British officers get on board. They start poking around, looking for guns, looking for gold, looking for anything illegal. Mustafa Kemal is just leaning against a railing, watching them with those ice-blue eyes. He didn't say a word. After they left, he turned to his friends and said, "They think we're carrying weapons. Fools. They don't realize we're carrying a head full of ideas." The Black Sea was a nightmare. It was storming. The waves were huge, and the captain of the ship was terrified. He'd never seen a storm like this, and he was worried the British might still try to sink them. Mustafa Kemal just told him, "Keep the lights off and stay close to the shore. If we sink for the motherland." They spent 3 days in that dark, cold, rocking boat, probably all puking their guts out, but Mustafa Kemal was focused. He was looking at the coast of Anatolia. He knew that the second his boot touched that soil, there was no turning back. It was independence or death. No middle ground. May 19th, 1919. A Monday morning. The Bandirma pulls into the port of Samsun. It's a gray, drizzly day, nothing fancy. No red carpets, no bands playing. Just a skinny guy in a uniform stepping onto a wooden pier. But if you talk to any Turk today, they'll tell you that was the second the world changed. That was the Big Bang. The minute he stepped off that boat, the Ottoman Empire ended and the Turkish nation began. But Samsun was a mess. It was full of British soldiers and Greek gangs. Mustafa Kemal realizes he can't do his work there. He needs to go deeper. He needs the mountains. He moves his headquarters to a place called Havza. He's sick. He's got a fever. His kidneys are killing him. But he's writing telegram after telegram. He's reaching out to every commander in Anatolia, every governor, every local leader. He tells them, the government in Istanbul is paralyzed. The nation is in danger. We need to wake up. He organizes the first mass protests. He tells the people, don't hand over your guns. In fact, find more guns. The British realized they'd been played. They scrambled. They sent an urgent telegram to Istanbul. Get that guy back here. He's not quieting the Turks. He's starting a revolution. The Sultan sends a frantic message to Mustafa Kemal. Come back to Istanbul immediately. Your mission is over. Mustafa Kemal plays for time. He says, the boat is broken, or I'm sick, or the telegraph lines are down. He's moving, man. He's heading to Amasya. In Amasya, in June 1919, he sits down with his buddies, guys like Ralph Orbe and Ali Fiat-Sebest, and they write the Amasya Circular. This is the birth certificate of the revolution. It says, the independence of the nation will be saved by the nation's own determination and willpower. Think about how radical that was. He wasn't saying the Sultan would save them. He wasn't saying God would save them. He was saying the people had to do it. It was a declaration of war against the invaders and against the old system. The Sultan loses his mind. He officially fires Mustafa Kemal. He orders the army to arrest him. This is the moment of truth. Man, Mustafa Kemal is in Erzurum, preparing for a big congress of the eastern provinces. He gets the news that he's been dismissed. He looks at his uniform, the medals he won at Gallipoli, the stripes he earned in Libya and the Caucasus. He takes them off, every single one. He resigns from the army he'd served since he was a kid. He's no longer a general. He's no longer a pasha. He's just Mustafa Kemal, a civilian with a death warrant on his head. He walks into the meeting room where all the other officers are waiting. He tells them, I am now just a member of the nation. I have no power to give you orders. There's a long silence. Everyone is thinking, do we arrest him? Do we follow him? If we follow him, we're all traitors. Then Kazım Karabekir, a powerful general with a massive army at his back, walks into the room. Everyone holds their breath. Karabekir walks straight up to Mustafa Kemal, clicks his heels, gives a sharp salute, and says, I and my army are at your command, my pasha. Mustafa Kemal's eyes fill with tears. He'd won. He didn't have a title anymore, but he had the heart of the army. The national struggle wasn't just a dream anymore. It had a headquarters, it had a leader, and it had teeth. He'd jumped off the cliff, and the people had caught him. Now, it was time to build a government from the dust of Anatolia.
Part 8. The Heart of the Highlands and the People's Voice, 1919 to 1920.
So, Mustafa Kemal is now a civilian. He's stripped off the uniform, the medals, the titles, everything that made him safe in the eyes of the law. He's technically a rebel, a traitor, an outlaw if a British patrol or a loyalist officer catches him. It's a one-way trip to a gallows in Istanbul. But here's the thing about the guy. He never looked more like a leader than when he was wearing a simple wool suit and a cowpack. He wasn't relying on a sultan's decree anymore. He was relying on the people sitting across from him in dusty rooms. He heads the Erzurum for the first big meeting, the Erzurum Congress. Now, Erzurum is high up in the mountains. It's cold, it's rugged, and the people there are tough as nails. These were the guys who had seen the Russians and the Armenians invading their homes. They didn't want fancy speeches. They wanted to know if they were going to have a country left. Mustafa Kemal sits down with them, and they hammer out the national pact. This was the first time they drew a line in the dirt and said, "This is Turkey. Everything inside these borders is our home, and it's inseparable." They weren't fighting for the Ottoman Empire's old colonies anymore. They were fighting for the land under their boots. But then comes the Sivas Congress in September 1919, and man, this was the real make-or-break moment. See, not everyone was as confident as Mustafa Kemal. A lot of the intellectuals and politicians were scared. They looked at the British and the French and thought, "There's no way we can beat these guys. We're broke, we're tired, and we have no ammo." So they started talking about a mandate. Some wanted a British mandate. Some wanted an American mandate. They figured, hey, if we let the Americans run the place for a few years, maybe they'll build us some schools and roads and keep the Greeks away. Mustafa Kemal sat there in that high school building in Sivas, listening to these guys argue about which master they should choose. He was getting more and more heated. Finally, he'd had enough. He stood up and basically told them they were being cowards. He said, "Independence is not something you ask for. It's not something someone gives you. You either have it or you don't." He looked him in the eye and gave him the ultimate ultimatum. "Ya istiklal, ya olam." Either independence or death. There was no third option. No maybe, no protection. He convinced them that a nation that accepts a mandate is a nation that has already given up its soul. By the time the Congress ended, they had unified every small resistance group in Anatolia into one massive organization. They weren't a bunch of local gangs anymore. They were a national movement. Now, he needed a home base. Istanbul was occupied. Sivas was too far east, and the world was moving fast. He looked at a map, and his finger landed on a tiny, dusty, central Anatolian town called Ankara. Back then, Ankara was nothing. It wasn't a city. It was a village with a few old houses and a lot of mud. But it had a telegraph line and a railway station that went nowhere, and most importantly, it was right in the middle of the country. It was safe from the British Navy's big guns. On December 27, 1919, Mustafa Kemal and his small team drove into Ankara in a couple of beat-up cars. The whole town came out to meet him. The Segmenler, the local traditional warriors, put on their best clothes, grabbed their rifles, and gave him a hero's welcome. They knew he was the only hope they had. He set up shop in an old agricultural school building. He slept on a small cot, worked 20 hours a day, and lived on coffee and cigarettes. He was building a government out of thin air. Man, but the British weren't stupid. They saw what was happening in Ankara. They decided to crack down. On March 16th, 1920, they officially occupied Istanbul, raiding the parliament and arresting anyone who looked like they liked Mustafa Kemal. They thought that by cutting off the head in Istanbul, they'd kill the body in Anatolia. It backfired spectacularly. All the smart, patriotic politicians and officers who hadn't joined the resistance yet realized that Istanbul was a dead end. They started sneaking out of the city in disguises, some dressed as dervishes, some as peasants, and they all headed for the one place they knew was free, Ankara. Mustafa Kemal saw his chance. He called for a new election. He told the country, "The Istanbul government is finished. We need a voice that speaks for people." On April 23rd, 1920, they opened the Grand National Assembly in Ankara.
Nisan rüzgarı fısıldar, fısıldar bir masal. Çocuklar uyanır, dünya bir kartpostal. Güneşin sofrasında taze bir neşe, egemenlik doğar, her yürek ateşte. Haydi çocuklar el ele tutuşalım, geleceğe doğru coşkuyla koşalım. Sizin olsun bugün bu bayram, bu bahar. Dünya çocukları umutla bakar, umutla bakar.
It wasn't a palace, but it was a half-finished building that was supposed to be a club. They didn't have enough tiles for the roof, so the people of Ankara brought tiles from their own houses to finish it. They borrowed desks from a nearby elementary school. It was cramped, it was hot, and it was perfect. Mustafa Kemal was elected the first Speaker of the House. He stood in front of that group of men, farmers in wool caps, clerics in robes, officers in dusty uniforms, and he told them, "From this moment on, there is no power above this assembly." He wasn't the boss. The people were the boss. He was turning a monarchy into a democracy while a war was raging. But the Sultan wasn't going down without a fight. He saw Mustafa Kemal as a bigger threat than the British. He issued a fatwa, a religious decree, saying that Mustafa Kemal and his friends were infidels and that it was a religious duty for any Muslim to kill them. He set up the army of the Caliphate and started sending them to fight the nationalist forces. It was a civil war on top of an independence war. Rebels were popping up everywhere, funded by British gold and encouraged by the Sultan's lies. For a few months there in 1920, it looked like it was all going to fall apart. The Greeks were pushing from the west, the French from the south, and the Sultan's rebels were closing in on Ankara. Mustafa Kemal was working in a room with a map on the wall and a pistol on the table. He knew that if the internal rebellions didn't stop, the external enemies would just walk in and finish the job. He had to be ruthless. He set up independence tribunals to deal with the traitors and the deserters. It was a dark, bloody time, but he knew that if he wavered for 1 second, the whole dream would die in the mud. He was the man in the eye of the storm. He was being shot at from the front, stabbed in the back, and cursed from the minarets in Istanbul, but he stayed steady. He kept the assembly together by sheer force of personality. He told them, "We have no money, we have no shoes, and we have no friends, but we have the truth." He was waiting for the first big test on the battlefield. He knew that the only thing that would make the world take Ankara seriously was a victory. And man, that victory was coming, but it was going to cost him every drop of sweat he had left. By the end of 1920, the national struggle was no longer just a bunch of guys in a basement. It was a state. It had a law. It had a parliament. And it was starting to build a real army. The British thought they could just let the Greeks do the dirty work for them. They had no idea that Mustafa Kemal was turning a bunch of broken peasants into a machine that was about to break the heart of the empire.
Part 9. The Line in the Sand and the 22 Nights of Hell, 1921.
So, it's early 1921, and the honeymoon phase of the new parliament is officially over. The reality check hits hard. You've got the Greek army, backed by British money and British guns, starting to move inland from the coast. They're not just looking for a skirmish. They want to swallow Anatolia whole. Up until this point, the Turkish resistance was basically a bunch of brave locals, guerrilla fighters called the Kuvvi Milli. They were tough, sure, and they knew the terrain, but they weren't a professional army. They didn't have a chain of command, they didn't have heavy artillery, and they were starting to act like they were their own bosses. Mustafa Kemal knew this was a recipe for disaster. You can't beat a modern European empire with a bunch of guys in wool hats and old hunting rifles. He needed a regular army, and he needed it yesterday. He puts his right-hand man, Izmir Pasha, in charge of the Western Front. Izmir was a quiet guy, a bit of nerd for logistics, but he was loyal to the bone. They started rounding up the guerrillas and telling them, look, either you join the regular army and follow orders, or you're out. Some of the guerrilla leaders, like Turks, didn't like being told what to do and actually rebelled against Ankara. So, while the Greeks were marching in, Mustafa Kemal had to deal with a mini-civil war on his own side. It was a nightmare, man, but he didn't flinch. He crushed the internal rebellion and stood his ground. In January and April of 1921, the Greeks tried to test a new Turkish army at a place called Inonu. Twice they attacked, and twice Izmir Pasha slapped them back. These weren't massive world-changing battles yet, but for the Turkish soul, they were everything. It was the first time in centuries that a regular Turkish soldier had stood toe-to-toe with a Western-backed force and said, "Not today." Mustafa Kemal sent a telegram to Izmir that became famous. He said, "You didn't just defeat the enemy there, you defeated the ill fortune of the nation." He was telling the people that the losing streak was over. But the Greeks were just getting warmed up. They were embarrassed. They brought in more troops, more tanks, and more planes. In July 1921, they launched a massive offensive. This time, the Turks took a beating. They lost Kütahya and Eskişehir. The Greek army was moving fast, and Ankara was suddenly in their crosshairs. People in the assembly were losing their minds. They were screaming, "Where is the hero of Gallipoli now? Why are we losing?" They started talking about moving the government even further east to Kayseri. Mustafa Kemal watched the panic and realized he had to take the heat himself. He stood up and said, "Fine, if you want a leader, give me total control. Give me the power of the commander-in-chief for 3 months." They were scared he'd become a dictator, but they were more scared of the Greek bayonets. They gave him the power. The first thing he does is the gutsiest move of the whole war. He orders the army to retreat. He tells them to pull back 100 kilometers, all the way to the east of the Sakarya River. His own generals were horrified. We're giving up the heartland. We're letting them get closer. But Mustafa Kemal was playing a deeper game. He knew that the further the Greeks marched into the dry, rocky, empty center of Anatolia, the more their supply lines would stretch and snap. He was letting the desert do the work for him. While the Greeks were celebrating their advance, Mustafa Kemal was in Ankara issuing the Teklifi Milli, the national tax orders. He wasn't asking for money because there was no money. He was asking for socks. He was asking for one set of underwear from every household. He was taking 40% of everyone's grain, their horses, their wheels. He was turning every single person in the country into a soldier. He was stripping the nation to its bones to feed the front. Then came August 23rd, 1921, the Battle of Sakarya. This wasn't a normal battle. This was a 22-day and 22-night meat grinder. The front line was 100 kilometers long. The Greeks were attacking with a fury that was terrifying. They were taking hill after hill. Mustafa Kemal was right there at the command post on the hills, even though he'd just broken a rib after falling off his horse. He was in constant pain, smoking like a chimney, looking at the maps through a haze of dust and blood. When his officers came to him saying, "The line is broken, we have to retreat," he gave them the order that changed military history. He said, "There is no line of defense but a surface of defense, and that surface is the whole motherland. Not 1 inch of the soil shall be abandoned until it is drenched in the blood of the citizens." Think about what that meant. He was telling them that if the enemy breaks your trench, you don't run. You just turn around, find the next rock, and keep shooting. There was no backwards. Every foot of ground was the final stand. The fighting was so intense that officers were picking up rifles and fighting like privates. Thousands were dying every day. The Sakarya River was literally running red, but the Turks didn't break. For 3 weeks, they held on by their fingernails. On the 22nd day, something shifted. The Greeks looked at the Turkish lines and realized that no matter how many they killed, more Turks just kept appearing. They were out of ammo, their food was gone, and they were exhausted. They finally realized they couldn't win. They turned around and started to retreat. It was the first time since the siege of Vienna in 1683 that the Turkish army had stopped a major European advance and forced it backwards. When the news reached Ankara, the city went wild. The assembly gave Mustafa Kemal the title of Gazi, the victorious warrior, and made him a marshal. But he didn't celebrate. He knew the job wasn't done. The Greeks were still in Anatolia, and they were digging in for the long haul. The world was shocked, though. The French and the Italians realized the Greeks were a bad bet, so they started making secret deals with Mustafa Kemal to leave Turkey. The British were left holding the bag. Mustafa Kemal had stopped the bleeding, but now he had to finish the fight. Everyone expected him to attack immediately after Sakarya, but he did something that drove everyone crazy. He waited. He waited for a whole year. He knew that to kick the Greeks out for good, he couldn't just push them. He had to destroy them in one blow. He spent that year secretly building up his strength, gathering every bullet and every horse he could find. He was preparing for the final strike, the one that would end the war and start the nation. The sick man was off his deathbed, and he was holding a bayonet. The final act was about to begin.
Yeşil uyanır Sakarya'nın nergis kokusuyla. Bir sır taşır Sapanca'nın aynalı suları.
Part 10. The Great Strike and the Race to the Sea, 1922.
So, it's the summer of 1922, and the tension in Ankara is so thick you could cut it with a bayonet. It's been an entire year since the miracle at Sakarya. One whole year of sitting, waiting, and training. To the outside world, it looked like Mustafa Kemal had lost his nerve. The politicians in the assembly were practically screaming at him every day. What are you doing? The enemy is still on our land. Are you waiting for them to leave on their own? The army is eating through our last bits of grain, and you're just staring at maps. Even some of his closest friends were starting to whisper that maybe the Gazi was burnout. But Mustafa Kemal knew something they didn't. He knew that if he attacked and failed, there was no plan B. There was no more money, no more men, and no more chances. He didn't want to just win a battle. He wanted to end the war in a single weekend. He was playing high-stakes poker, and he was waiting for the perfect hand. To pull this off, he needed total, absolute secrecy. He needed the Greeks to think the Turkish army was still months away from being ready. So he pulled one of the greatest fake-outs in history. In late July, he organized a massive football match between army teams in Izmir. He invited all the high-ranking generals, even the ones from the furthest outposts, to come and watch the game. To the British spies and the Greek intelligence, it looked like a holiday. They saw the Turkish top brass laughing and cheering for goals, so they relaxed. But as soon as the sun went down and the spectators left, those generals weren't going to bed. They were in a dark room with Mustafa Kemal, finalizing the most aggressive attack plan ever conceived. He told them, "We're to go and move the entire army south, under the cover of night, right in front of the Greeks' strongest positions. We're going to hit them where they think they're invincible." On the night of August 24th, the whole Turkish army started to move. It was a ghost march, man. Tens of thousands of men, thousands of horses, and heavy artillery moving in total silence through the pitch-black Anatolian night. They wrapped the horses' hooves in rags, so they wouldn't make noise on the rocks. They didn't light a single cigarette. By the morning of August 26th, the Greeks woke up to find a massive army sitting right on their doorstep at Afyon. Mustafa Kemal climbed up to the peak of Kakatip. It was 5:30 in the morning, freezing cold, and a thick fog was covering the valley. He stood there, looking at his pocket watch, the new one, since the old one was shattered at Gallipoli. He gave the signal. The Turkish artillery opened up with a roar that shook the mountains. It wasn't just a bombardment. It was years of suppressed rage being fired out of cannon barrels. The Greek defensive lines were built by British engineers who had said, if the Turks can break these lines in 6 months, they can say they did it in a day. Mustafa Kemal's men broke them in 6 hours. By noon, the impenetrable Greek fortifications were a smoking pile of rubble. The Turkish infantry charged with ferocity that was almost supernatural. They weren't just soldiers anymore. They were a force of nature. Mustafa Kemal was right there on the ridge, watching through his binoculars. He saw the Greek army, the same one that had been dreaming of an empire, start to crumble and run. By August 30th, the two armies met for the final, brutal showdown at Dumlupiner. This was the field battle of the commander-in-chief. It was a total collapse of the Greek command. The Turkish cavalry, led by Feridun Altay, performed a legendary maneuver, swinging around the back and cutting off the Greek retreat. It was a slaughter. The Greek commander-in-chief, General Trikoupes, was actually captured because he had no idea where his own lines were anymore. When they brought him to Mustafa Kemal's tent, Trikoupes was shocked. He expected a barbarian, but instead he found a refined, calm general who offered him coffee and treated him with respect. Mustafa Kemal looked at the map, then looked at his officers, and gave the order that would echo through history. Ordular, ilk hedefiniz Akdeniz'dir. İleri. Armies, your first goal is the Mediterranean. Forward. What happened next was a race that the world couldn't believe. The Greek army was in a dead sprint toward the coast, trying to reach the ships in Izmir. The Turkish soldiers, who had been fighting for 5 days straight without sleep, didn't stop to rest. They ran. They covered 400 kilometers in 9 days. Think about that, bud. On foot, in the heat of August, through the dust of Anatolia, carrying rifles and packs. They were covering 40 to 50 kilometers a day. They were so fast that they often reached towns before the retreating Greeks even realized they were being followed. On September 9th, 1922, the first Turkish cavalry units rode into Izmir. The city was a sea of red and white. People were throwing flowers, crying, and kissing the hooves of the horses. After 3 years of occupation, the nightmare was over. Mustafa Kemal entered the city a day later. As his car drove toward the government house, the crowd was going wild. But then he reached the entrance of the building where he was going to stay. Someone had laid a Greek flag on the ground right at the doorstep. They told him, "King Constantine stepped on our flag when he came here. Now it's your turn to step on theirs." Mustafa Kemal stopped. He looked at the flag on the ground, then looked at the people. He said, "Pick that flag up. A flag is a symbol of a nation's honor. It doesn't matter if it belongs to your enemy. You do not trample on it. The king made a mistake by stepping on ours. I will not repeat his mistake." That moment right there tells you everything you need to know about the man. He wasn't a man of revenge. He was a man of dignity. He had just won the greatest military victory of his life, but he was already thinking about the peace he had to build. But the war wasn't quite over. The British were still sitting in Istanbul and at the Dardanelles, the Chanak region. They were furious that their proxies, the Greeks, had been wiped out. For a few days, it looked like World War II was going to start right then and there in 1922. The British Prime Minister, Lloyd George, wanted to fight. He ordered the British troops to hold the line. Mustafa Kemal didn't blink. He marched his victorious, battle-hardened army right up to the British wire. But he gave his soldiers a very specific order. Keep your rifles slung over your shoulders. Don't point them. Just walk. It was the ultimate game of chicken. The British soldiers saw these Turkish veterans, men who had just run 400 miles and destroyed an army, walking calmly toward them. The British public and their allies, Canada and Australia, screamed, "No more war." The British government collapsed. Lloyd George resigned in disgrace, and the British commanders had no choice but to sit down and talk. The military phase of the national struggle was over. Mustafa Kemal had done the impossible. He had taken a defeated, broken, occupied people and turned them into a force that humiliated the greatest empires on the planet. He had won the land back with blood. But as he looked at the smoking ruins of Izmir and the exhausted faces of his people, he knew that the hardest part was just beginning. He had kicked out the invaders, but now he had to kick out the ignorance, the poverty, and the ancient, rotting systems that had allowed the invasion in the first place. He was about to trade his marshal's uniform for a civilian suit, and the revolution he was about to start would be even more shocking than the war he had just won.
Part 11. The Death of a Dynasty and the Birth of the Republic, 1922 to 1923.
So, the war is technically won. The Greeks have sailed away from Izmir, and the British are cooling their heels in Istanbul, but man, the air in Turkey was still electric with tension. You'd think Mustafa Kemal would just take a vacation, maybe go to a beach in Antalya and relax. But the guy was working harder than ever. He knew that military victories are like sandcastles. If you don't build a stone wall around them, the next tide of history will just wash them away. He wasn't just fighting for a piece of land. He was fighting for a new century. And the first thing he had to deal with was the elephant in the room, the Sultan. See, while Mustafa Kemal was in the trenches at Sakarya and Kakatip, Sultan Vahdettin was in his palace in Istanbul, surrounded by British guards, calling the nationalist rebels and infidels. Now that the rebels had won, things got awkward fast. The British tried one last sneaky move. They invited both the Sultan's government in Istanbul and the National Assembly in Ankara to the peace conference in Lausanne, Switzerland. They wanted to play them against each other, hoping to divide the Turks at the table. Mustafa Kemal saw right through it. He decided it was time to cut the cord. On November 1st, 1922, he walked into the assembly in Ankara and proposed a law to abolish the Sultanate. The debate was heated, man. Some of the more traditional members of the assembly were terrified. They'd lived their whole lives thinking the Sultan was God's shadow on earth. They were arguing and citing ancient laws, trying to find a way to keep the monarchy. Mustafa Kemal listened for a while. Then he climbed up on a bench, literally stood on a seat, and told them straight, sovereignty and kingship are not given to anyone by anyone else because they're scholarly or through debate. Sovereignty is taken by strength, by power, and by force. He basically told them that the nation had already taken its sovereignty back on the battlefield. The assembly just needed to sign the paperwork. If they didn't, he hinted, heads might roll. That did the trick. The Sultanate was abolished. On November 17th, Vahdettin, the last sultan of a 600-year-old empire, snuck out the back door of his palace and boarded a British warship, the HMS Malaya, to go into exile. The Ottoman Empire was officially over. But then came the diplomatic marathon. Mustafa Kemal sent his most trusted friend, Izmir Pasha, to Lausanne. Izmir was a soldier, not a diplomat, and he was a bit hard of hearing. The European diplomats, led by the British Lord Curzon, thought they could bully him. Curzon was this arrogant aristocrat who talked to Izmir like he was a naughty schoolboy. But Izmir was a rock, bud. Whenever the British tried to push a deal that compromised Turkish independence, Izmir would just point to his ear and say, "I can't hear you. My ears are bad from the cannons at the front. Let's start over." He drove them crazy for months. Mustafa Kemal was in Ankara, sending telegrams every day, telling Izmir, "Do not give up an inch on our independence. We didn't win a war just to become a colony in a tuxedo." In July 1923, they finally signed the Treaty of Lausanne. It was a total victory. The world recognized Turkey as a fully independent, sovereign nation. No more foreign judges, no more foreign control over the money, no more sick man. Now, Turkey was free, but what was it? It was a country with no clear identity. Was it a kingdom, a religious state, a military dictatorship? Mustafa Kemal knew exactly what he wanted, a republic, but he had to be careful. Even his closest friends were skeptical about the word republic. It sounded too radical, too Western. So he waited for a political crisis to force the issue. In late October 1923, the government in Ankara hit a deadlock. They couldn't agree on a new cabinet. Everything was paralyzed. This was the opening Mustafa Kemal needed.
Ufukta bir çizgi, kara bir duman. Demir kollar kırılır, daralır zaman. Prangalar çözülür, ruhumda isyan. Doğuyor güneşe yeni bir devran.
On the night of October 28, 1923, he invited a few of his closest allies to dinner at Ankara. Picture the scene: a simple table, some basic food, lots of cigarette smoke. In the middle of the meal, he put down his glass, looked at his friends, and said it as calmly as if he were talking about the weather. "Efendiler, yarın Cumhuriyeti ilan edeceğiz. Gentlemen, tomorrow we shall proclaim the Republic." It wasn't a question, it was a mission statement. The next day, October 29th, he walked into the assembly. He proposed a change to the Constitution. The debate didn't last long. Everyone knew the Gazi was right. At 8:30 p.m., the Republic of Turkey was officially proclaimed. The room erupted in cheers of "Long live the Republic." 101 cannons were fired across the country. Mustafa Kemal was elected the first president. In his inaugural speech, he didn't talk about his own glory. He talked about the people. He said the Republic would be built on the foundation of science and civilization. But don't think for a second that he sat back and celebrated. He knew the hardest work was ahead. He was now the head of a country that was 90% illiterate, traumatized by 10 years of constant war, and stuck in the Middle Ages. He had a vision of a Turkey that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Paris, London, and New York. He was about to launch a series of reforms so fast and so deep that it would make the heads of his own people spin. He was moving from the commander of the army to the teacher of the nation. He was about to take off the cowpack and put on a top hat, and the world was about to see a revolution unlike any other in history. The Sultan was gone. The war was won. The Republic was born. Now, it was time to build a soul for the new body.
Part 12. The Blackboard Revolution and the Architect of the Future, 1924 to 1938.
So, the Republic is born, the flags are flying, and Mustafa Kemal is the president. But he's looking out the window of his office in Ankara, and he's not happy. He knows that a republic with an uneducated population is just a house built on sand. In 1923, only about 10% of the men and less than 1% of the women in Turkey could read or write. Most people were living exactly like their ancestors did in the 15th century. They were shackled by superstitions, stuck in a rigid social hierarchy, and totally disconnected from the scientific world. Mustafa Kemal used to say, "The real victory is the one over ignorance." He'd beaten the Greeks and the British with guns, but now he had to beat 1,000 years of mental darkness. And man, that was a much tougher fight. He started with the brain of the country, the education system. At the time, Turkey had a mess of different schools, religious madrasis that only taught theology, and a few modern schools that were barely hanging on. In 1924, he passed a law on the unification of education. He basically shut down the old religious schools overnight and put every single school under the Ministry of Education. He wanted a single, secular, scientific curriculum for every Turkish kid, whether they were in a village or city. He wanted them to learn math, physics, and history, not just memorization. He used to say, "The truest guide in life is science." If it wasn't logical or provable, he didn't want it in the classroom. But then he hit a massive wall, the alphabet. For centuries, Turks had used the Arabic script. Now, the script itself is beautiful, but it's incredibly difficult for the Turkish language. It is a sound that Arabic doesn't have. And it took years for a regular person to even learn how to write their own name. It was a barrier to progress. Mustafa Kemal decided to switch the whole country to the Latin alphabet. His advisors told him it would take 15 years to transition. He looked at them and said, "We'll do it in 3 months." He didn't just sign a decree. He became the head teacher. He literally packed up a portable Blackboard and went on a tour of the country. Imagine the president of a country standing in a public park in a village, chalk in hand, teaching ABC to farmers who had never seen a book. He made it cool to learn. Within a few years, literacy rates exploded. He had unlocked the doors of knowledge for millions. Then he looked at the social structure. He saw that half of the population, the women, were being kept behind curtains. They were uneducated, they had no legal rights, and they were basically treated like property. Mustafa Kemal was disgusted by this. He said, "Is it possible that while one half of a nation is reaching the skies, the other half is chained to the ground?" He didn't wait for a slow evolution. In the mid-1920s and 30s, he pushed through laws that gave Turkish women the right to a civil marriage, the right to a divorce, and the right to inherit property. And in 1934, he gave them the right to vote and be elected to parliament, years before women in modern countries like France or Italy could even dream of it. He encouraged women to be doctors, judges, and pilots. He adopted a daughter, Sabiha Gökhan, and encouraged her to become the world's first female fighter pilot, just to show the world that there were no limits. He changed everything, Bud. He changed the way people measured time, switching to the international calendar, the way they measure weight, and even the way they named themselves. Before 1934, Turks didn't have surnames. It was just Mustafa, son of Ali. It was a mess for banking, for the army, for everything. So he passed a surname law. Everyone had to pick a family name. The assembly gave him the name Atatürk, Father of the Turks. He didn't pick it himself. They gave it to him as a tribute. He picked Inonu for his right-hand man Izmir after the battle where he'd beaten the Greeks. He was building the identity of a modern nation, piece by piece. But man, the pace he worked it was insane. He was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night. He was drinking dozens of cups of coffee, smoking 60 cigarettes a day, and reading thousands of books. He was trying to do in 10 years what Europe had done in 300 by the late 1930s. His body started to pay the price. He was diagnosed with cirrhosis of the liver. His doctors told him to rest, but he wouldn't listen. In 1938, even as he was dying, he was still worried about the Hatti issue, a piece of land on the Syrian border that he wanted back for Turkey. He traveled there in the heat, standing for hours at military parades just to show the French that he was still strong, even though he was in agony. On November 10th, 1938, at 9:05 in the morning, the heart of the blue-eyed giant stopped beating in Dolmabahce Palace in Istanbul. The news hit the country like a physical blow. People literally fell to their knees in the streets. When his body was being moved to Ankara, millions of people lined the tracks for hundreds of miles just to see the train pass. Even his old enemies were in shock. A Greek general said, "We were beaten by a man who is not only a soldier, but a spirit." A British statesman said, "The world has lost a genius." Atatürk didn't leave behind a bank account full of gold or a palace for his kids. He left behind a republic. He left behind a language that people could read, a legal system that was fair, and a vision of a Turkey that was contemporary with modern civilizations. He was a man who hated war, but was a master of it. A man who was a dictator, but used his power to build a democracy. And a man who believed that the only way to save a nation was to teach it how to think for itself. Today, over 80 years after his death, if you walk through any city in Turkey, you'll see his face. You'll see his words on every school building. Not because the law says it has to be there, but because the people know that every freedom they have, every book they read, every vote they cast, started with that one man on a rusty boat heading some soon. He wasn't just a leader. He was the soul of a people that had forgotten how to dream. He was Atatürk. And as long as a Turkish kid goes to school or a Turkish woman walks freely in the street, he is still alive.